A few months ago on the channel, I made a video showcasing GM-Martin84's excellent 2014 port of classic Doom, titled 64 Doom. This ambitious project brought the original classic Doom experience to Nintendo 64 and it ran really well, but it had obvious issues that you had to overlook and had some real stability issues that you'd more than likely run into if you played for long periods. But when researching for that video, I was made aware of an updated version. Also created by GM-Martin84, this version released in 2023 and addresses a lot of the issues, offers better overall performance, and delivers the optimal Nintendo 64 experience. It also removes this weird banding issue that was very obvious but easily ignorable in the original offerings. The only issue was finding the ROMs was difficult. But after hours of hunting around, trying and failing to compile the files using various software and hitting a wall, I was finally able to make it happen. Before diving in to showcase this updated version of 64 Doom, and arguably the one you should try if you're really curious, I wanted to quickly showcase how to make this happen yourself. It's really simple when you bring all the pieces together. Now I can't give you the N64 files complete, because someone at Bethesda might get a bit annoyed by that. What I can do though is walk you through the process on how to assemble it for yourself. All you need is the base Doom mods and some patches. Doom, Doom 2, TNT and Plutonia all work with 64 Doom. Your best bet for the highest success rate is to use the Steam mods. Download this patch from the Internet Archive, unzip it and then head over to a ROM patcher website. Thank you Aria Hero 64 for compiling these patches, it genuinely made this process a lot easier. Now I use this patcher, but you can use whichever one you fancy. Put the ROM file in here and put the patch file in here. If it was successful, the ROM should be downloaded and you're good to go. If it fails, it'll tell you straight away. Do note, this doesn't work on all emulators, and if you want to play on N64 hardware, you will need an expansion pack and a NeverDrive-like device to put the files on. What do you get for all this trouble? 64 Doom is by and large a very fun way to experience classic Doom. It has all the experiences, all the levels in their full forms, and manages to deliver a very solid experience on Nintendo's hardware. The music can be grating at points, but luckily you can drop the music volume in the menu if it gets too much. It is worth noting that this is based off the Linux port of Doom, so there's a few quirks which are introduced because of that. Controls are fine once you get used to them. You can use either the thumbstick or the D-pad to move around. You can also toddle running using the Z button, although this seems to activate some cheats if you bash it too much during gameplay, so do be a bit careful there. You can toddle and change graphic settings to suit your needs. I suspect high performance gains if you zoom in the window and reduce the resolution, but I genuinely found no need for that during my gameplay. You can also save your game, but you do need a memory pack for that. As I said in the original video for 64 Doom, this showcases what Nintendo 64 gamers truly missed out on. I believe that had this released in the N64's release window, this would probably be held up as the best 1990s port of classic Doom. The fact that this doesn't just run Doom 1 and Doom 2, but the two parts of Final Doom is very ambitious. It showcases that Nintendo 64 hardware was definitely no slouch and was more than capable of running classic Doom had the games been brought to that platform. It's a hugely accomplished package that really brings together the best of Doom under one umbrella. So now I'm just going to play through some of the levels in 64 Doom just to give you a flavour for what this is actually like to experience. This is the 2023 version of 64 Doom, and as you can see, it looks pretty great. Now I'm capturing this off real Nintendo 64 hardware using an EverDrive and an Elgato capture card, and you can see that there is a world of difference between the original version that we played a few months ago and this version. To be fair, the original didn't look that bad, but obviously the banding issue was very noticeable, and in particular when I was playing in some of the darker areas of that version, it was really noticeable. So I'm really kind of glad that between these two releases, that was the big issue that got resolved. And to be fair, there were other fixes and tweaks made to make this more stable, because apparently the original one was somewhat unstable at points, it could crash, but this one's very much better for that, and it's got a few more features involved as well. Now, the guy that made this, GM-Martin84, he's worked on a number of projects, including the Dreamcast Doom port that's currently in development, so this is in expert hands, and you can feel that here. This is an incredibly solid port. Like, if this had been released into stores like this, I don't think anyone would have really complained. But what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to give you a moment or two just to enjoy the ambience. The important thing to note is that this supports all of the original iWADs, so that includes Doom, Ultimate Doom, Doom 2, and Final Doom. Yes, you can use the shareware version if you really want to, although quite why you'd want to do that, I'm not sure. Unfortunately, I was not able to get this working on various emulators. I did try a few, and all of them kind of threw a bit of a strop when I tried. So unfortunately, if you want to try this out, I would say real hardware is probably the way to go, and you will need an expansion pack because the original card will not support this, unfortunately. But in terms of actual gameplay, it's just really fun to play through. Like, once you kind of get used to the fact that you've got to press B to open doors, the C buttons, the right and left, switch the weapons, and the map is, I think it's up. It's really fun to play through. What I also appreciate as well is that, unlike a lot of the other source port versions that were pushed out into the wild, like for example the PlayStation 2 port, as great as it was, didn't have a soundtrack, and that's a feature of some of these source ports. So to have a version of the Doom soundtrack here is pretty great, and it's all present and correct. So it does give you the Doom vibes, although I will say some of the louder tracks can get very loud, so you do have to be ready to throw the music volume down very quickly on some levels. But in terms of handling, it's just really fun. Obviously an official port probably would have let you change the button layout a tiny bit if you wanted to, much like Doom 64 did. But this is such a great proof of concept, and like I said, it just looks the part, it plays the part, and it feels the part, which is amazing to me because I always wondered as a kid if you could ever get Doom to run on a Nintendo 64, what it would look like. Could the Nintendo 64 even run the classic Doom games? And the answer here is yes, very well in fact. One of the more fun aspects of this version is that you can actually save using a Nintendo 64 memory pack peripheral, but it requires 123 empty blocks on it, so it's a very hungry game, this one. If you actually do want to make use of the saving system, you better have a dedicated memory pack for that. It's worth pointing out as well that Doom 64 had a password system, much like the PlayStation 1 version of Doom, so it's very likely if this had ever seen an official release, that's how saving would have worked. Now the real question is, would this have sold well on Nintendo 64? Given that the Nintendo 64 released in early 1996, I kind of suspect that there wasn't really much of an appetite to bring the original Doom game over. I kind of guess that by mid-1996, people weren't really that invested in the idea of playing the original Doom games yet again. In fact, with Doom 64, one of the common misconceptions was that was a version of the original Doom games. Ironically, what we're playing here is what most people thought you were getting with Doom 64, which probably is why that game had such a weird perception in wider gaming circles for such a long time. Once you get used to using the shoulder buttons to strafe, fighting the enemies isn't really that hard. In fact, it's about on par with the original PlayStation version, I'd say. If you've ever played the original PlayStation version, that version of Doom requires you to strafe a lot in order to avoid taking damage, probably more so than other versions. It's very strafe reliant, and I feel like this is very much of that ilk. But yeah, I'll let you listen a bit more to get the vibes here. And yes, all the level sets are still here, so you are able to go to the secret levels if that is what you desire. I will say this is a very sort of chipmunk GBA kind of ish version of this music, and the way that the music is handled in this version, I think some people love it, some people would hate it. It's definitely an acquired taste at points, but from a technical standpoint, this game renders directly to the Nintendo 64's frame buffer, as opposed to what Doom 64 did, which was have more polygon-based hardware rendering. Ultimately, this version of Doom works fundamentally different to Doom 64. As mentioned, I don't really like using the analog stick controls. I imagine if you were willing to sort of take the time to learn that, it wouldn't be too much of an issue, but the problem for me is it kind of makes things a bit more chaotic, and ThatNukemGuy kind of turns around a lot more. Whereas with the D-pad, at least you kind of have the option of not rocking around. It's a real shame as well that we never really got a true Doom multiplayer experience on Nintendo 64. Now, Doom 64, rather infamously, was originally conceived to have multiplayer, and then that was taken out because it was felt that was a waste of time. And mere months later, GoldenEye would come along and show that multiplayer was actually a massive deal on Nintendo 64. I personally think 4-player co-op or 4-player deathmatch would have worked really, really well here, and I do think that especially when you consider the fact that a lot of Nintendo 64 games used to cheat and cut the frame rate in half for the multiplayer modes, there was definitely a lot of scope here for a multiplayer mode of some kind. It's just a shame because obviously Doom 64, great game, but imagine if this had arrived on Nintendo 64 back in the day with 4-player co-op and 4-player deathmatch on one system. It would have been pretty spectacular in my opinion, because remember, on the PlayStation 1, you did have the option of multiplayer, but you had to have 2 consoles and 2 copies of the game and a link cable, and it gets quite expensive bringing all those things together. Whereas Nintendo 64 was a lot more friendly, I think, in terms of like local multiplayer, which is why a lot of multiplayer games did really well on Nintendo 64. But even in this space here, the performance is great. Like, I can't fault it. When you play through the PlayStation 1 version, there's always little hitches and hiccups, and it always kind of feels like you can feel the game struggling underneath you. But here, it's just smooth. It doesn't feel like it's been taxed all that much, and obviously I know it's being taxed because it's being rendered in software, which is very expensive for the Nintendo 64. And obviously you do need the expansion pack for this, because this does make use of the extra RAM, which is probably why it's able to perform so well. And yes, I just wanted to show off that you can make it all the way to these episodes and complete them. The Barons of Hell are indeed here, and there haven't been any modifications made to the levels from what I've been able to see. So this is as pure a experience that you're going to get from the PC version playing on console. It wouldn't be until the release of Doom 3's Collector's Edition, where Classic Doom was bundled in, that we would finally get that complete Doom package without the edited levels or without features being stripped away. So this could have really... that could have beaten it by almost a decade, and that's pretty crazy to think about. And obviously Doom 2 is here as well. Now, remember, Doom 2 only arrived on PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn, both of which, I would argue, the performance was very suboptimal. But here, you've got it running on Nintendo 64 hardware. Granted, you know, it's got the expansion pack for access to more RAM, but it's still running on real hardware here. I did notice as well that there were some changes in lighting in some areas. I suspect that's because of the way that the game is being sort of constructed on Nintendo 64, but it is just an interesting quirk of this version of Doom. It's also worth noting as well that I don't think Nintendo would have censored this game all that much, because by 1996-1997 they'd kind of relaxed the very strict sort of guidelines on what kind of games could be on the consoles. I think towards the end of the Super Nintendo era they kind of realised that it wasn't doing them any favours. And I feel that had this arrived on Nintendo 64 in the mid-1990s, it probably would have arrived in this state. I can't imagine they would have taken much out. Maybe the Nazi imagery in Wolfenstein and the secret levels, obviously. The thing with Doom 2 as well is there's a lot more enemies in this level, so it's definitely going to be a good showcase for how taxing things can get. Of course, if you play long enough with Doom 2, you'd reach some of the bigger levels, and eventually if you played through Final Doom, I can imagine that some of the biggest levels in TNT might present a problem. That's something I definitely would look into doing in the future. But of course, unlike the Jaguar version that I recently played of Doom 2, which didn't have the super shotgun, this version very much has it present and correct. The lighting in this version is a bit interesting as well. It seems a bit more prominent. I suspect that's mostly just down to the way that this is being constructed in front of us, but it is interesting to kind of see it happening in front of us. When I was discussing the music issue earlier on about the volume, this is one of the music tracks that really goes loud. Like, I've had to turn the music way down, even lower than it was in the other games I was playing. It would have been interesting, in my opinion, to see Final Doom make some kind of an appearance on the Nintendo 64, if only because that released in 1995, and obviously Nintendo 64 came out in 1996, so it probably could have formed part of a compilation package involving all of the games. Of course, if I wanted to see the bigger levels in TNT, of which there are many in the back half of the game, I probably would have to invest a few hours in getting there, but I might do that in the future, because I am very curious to see what the actual limitations of this port are. Would this have been able to handle those bigger levels, or like the PS1 version, would they have just been cut out completely? As I mentioned at the start of the video, getting to finally play this version of 64 Doom was really exciting for me, because finding all the different pieces and trying to get this together, for someone who's not super technical, I'm not super technically gifted, it was all a lot, and trying to find these was difficult. So I hope that the tutorial I've put in at the start of the video will help people to at least recreate this experience and maybe play it on Nintendo 64 hardware if you want to. But one thing this version does have over the PlayStation 1 version, this does definitely have arch vials, because in a second you'll see an arch vial up there. Grab the chain gun here. But overall, this is a very, very, very smooth experience. It's surprisingly smooth considering that there wasn't really any other console that ran Doom this well back in the 1990s. Now, of course, this has had the benefit of almost a decade of development, so it running this smooth is not really a surprise because obviously codes have been optimized and the game is running in what I would say is probably its most optimal form here. But it does serve as a very, very fun proof of concept for what could have been had there been an appetite from Midway or from id Software to bring this to the Nintendo 64. Obviously, the next time Doom would show up on a Nintendo console was the Nintendo Switch. It was actually that long before gamers on Nintendo's hardware were actually able to experience Doom in any form. But that's all there is really to this. I just wanted to show off this second build of 64 Doom because I feel it makes just enough improvements that it's a worthy successor, and I feel that if people were to experience this, they should come to try this one because this is definitely a very, very fun time, especially if you're playing on real console. If you do end up giving this a try, let me know in the comments how it goes for you. How do you find it? Do you think it handles really well in the hand on the controller? And do you think that the performance is good? Let me know if you even make it deep into the game so you can tell us how the much larger levels play out. Thank you so much for watching.